Ethan Cole boarded the plane like any other passenger. Quiet, composed, and unassuming. At just 17 years old, dressed in a dark hoodie, clean sneakers, and headphones draped casually around his neck, he looked like a typical teenager. But Ethan was anything but ordinary. The son of a powerful billionaire and owner of a major stake in the airline itself, Ethan chose to travel without bodyguards or entourage. He didn't flaunt his privilege. He simply walked to his seat in first class, placed his bag overhead, and opened a book, calm, prepared for a peaceful flight. But peace didn't last long. Karen Mitchell, a senior flight attendant known for her strict demeanor and quick judgments, scanned the cabin with precision. Her eyes landed on Ethan. Her steps slowed. Her expression hardened. Something about him didn't sit right with her. Not his behavior, which was flawless, but the way he looked. She approached with a forced smile, but her words carried suspicion. "Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" she asked, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Ethan, confused but polite, handed her his ticket. She glanced at it, then at him, then back again. Her disbelief was palpable. Despite the clear evidence in her hand, she refused to accept the truth. With a cold tone, she demanded he move to the back. When Ethan didn't move quickly enough, she struck his hand. An open slap that silenced the cabin, and no one intervened. No one defended him. But Ethan didn't yell. He didn't cry. He simply stood, walked to the back, and made one silent phone call. And that's when everything changed. The slap echoed louder in Ethan's mind than in the cabin itself. It wasn't the sting on his skin that burned. It was the silence that followed. The stillness of passengers turning away. The man across the aisle pretending to check his watch. A woman tightening her seatbelt as if buckling herself into a version of reality where this wasn't happening. Ethan Cole sat frozen for a moment. Not because he was scared. Not because he didn't know what to do. But because he was processing something deeper than humiliation. He had been raised to stay calm, to never let anger own his actions. But no amount of calm could erase the truth. He had just been judged, dismissed, and struck, all because someone decided he didn't belong. And no one said a word. He stood slowly. No rage in his step, no fire in his voice, just silence, heavy and thick. He picked up his backpack, pulled his hood a little further over his head, and began the walk down the aisle. The same aisle he had just walked down minutes ago, but this time, every eye followed him. No one stopped him. No one apologized. He was no longer a first-class passenger. He had become a ghost in a cabin full of strangers. Row after row blurred past. The luxury of the front faded into the cramped quarters of economy. He didn't pause, didn't scan for sympathy. He simply found an empty seat in the very last row, beside a cracked window and a broken armrest. The kind of seat no one chooses, but everyone accepts when they've run out of options. He slid into it, placed his backpack on his lap, and exhaled. Slowly, deliberately, like he was exhaling more than just air. Like he was letting go of the belief that being right was always enough. His phone buzzed once in his hand. The soft hum pulled him from the storm inside his chest. He unlocked the screen, stared at the home screen, then opened a message app. No hesitation, no overthinking, just one short line. She slapped my hand and kicked me out. I'm in the back. He hit send. Then silence again. Outside the small window, the runway looked long and still. The plane hadn't moved. The crew hadn't closed the doors. For the passengers, it was just a delay. For Ethan, it was something else. the quiet before a storm. One he didn't create, but one that had already started moving. He tightened his grip on the phone, not in fear, but in restraint. The old Ethan, the Ethan who had learned to stay quiet in classrooms, on sidewalks, in elevators, in places where people stared too long, was still there. But something had shifted. It wasn't just a flight. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a moment, one that couldn't be undone. One that had the weight of 1,000 other quiet moments like it. His heart beat louder than the hum of the engines. Still, he didn't look around, didn't search for the faces watching him. He had seen them already, the ones who turned away, the ones who heard Karen Mitchell's voice rise and said nothing, the ones who saw a teenage boy in a hoodie and decided that maybe, just maybe, she was right to doubt him. He stared at the floor. And then, another vibration, this one faint, short, but loaded. The message was read. Somewhere miles away in a tall office tower, someone else was now reading what he had written. Someone who would not ignore it. Someone who had power, and not just the kind that buys tickets. Ethan didn't know exactly what would happen next, but he knew this wasn't over. He leaned back in his seat. The cushion was thin, the noise of the cabin louder here. He could hear kids crying, overhead bins slamming, someone sneezing a few rows up, but none of it distracted him. Then a strange tension filled the air. The boarding doors hadn't closed. Time was ticking, but no final announcement came. No welcome from the pilot. Just murmurs, small ones, curious ones. Why are we not moving? Is something wrong with the flight? Did you see that kid in first class? The silence that had protected Karen Mitchell was cracking, and Ethan, still silent, still seated, could feel the shift. He didn't want drama. He didn't want revenge. He wanted truth. Not the kind printed in brochures, not the kind read from corporate scripts. Real truth. The kind that walks into a room and forces people to look again, to see the difference between a passenger and a problem, between confidence and arrogance, between silence and power. He rested his phone on his lap. The screen now dark. In the galley up front, Karen Mitchell sipped coffee with a smirk. She thought she had fixed a problem, moved an anomaly out of sight, kept first class in order. But she hadn't noticed the most important thing about the boy she pushed away. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. The message had been sent. A single line, not even punctuated with anger. Just truth. Ethan Cole sat motionless in the last row of the plane. Around him, the hum of conversation slowly dulled. The doors remained open. The cabin crew was unusually still. Something was happening. Something invisible to most passengers, but heavy enough to shift the air. He hadn't called. Not yet, but he knew the message had landed. 23 floors above street level. In a glass-paneled office surrounded by polished mahogany and silence, a phone buzzed. James Carter glanced at it. He didn't blink, didn't reach immediately. He always waited a beat before reacting. Calm was power. Then he read the message. She slapped my hand and kicked me out. I'm in the back. Just 12 words. But they carried more weight than any press release, lawsuit, or executive meeting. He didn't need context. He didn't need details. He knew his son's tone. Ethan never exaggerated, never dramatized. If he sent this, it was real. James Carter stood. He was a man who moved entire markets with a phone call, who once walked out of a shareholders' meeting because someone disrespected a receptionist. Respect wasn't a performance to him. It was a principle, a rule. and someone had just broken it. He picked up his office phone and pressed a number he had memorized long ago. Not the general line, not the press department. He went straight to the top point. 2 beeps. Yes, sir? Came the voice on the other end, efficient, crisp, prepared. Flight 672, James said, his voice sharp as steel. Eyes on it. Now, passenger in seat 2A. There's been an incident. There was a pause, then a clipped response. Understood. He hung up without another word. Across the city, a ripple of activity began. Terminals lit up with flags. Lines flickered red. A quiet protocol went into effect, the kind reserved only for emergencies or direct executive orders. But this wasn't a fire. It wasn't a technical issue. It was something deeper. Back on the plane, the captain, Ree Hammond, received a call on the secure cockpit line. He listened carefully, the color draining slightly from his face. He had flown through lightning storms and near collisions. He'd landed jets on ice-covered runways. But never, not once, had he received an executive-level hold. Until now. The voice on the other end gave clear instructions. No movement. No taxi. No communication to passengers until further notice. Copy that, Hammond said quietly. He turned to his co-pilot and nodded once. The flight was grounded in the galley. Karen Mitchell was still savoring her coffee. She thought she had done her job, maintained order, put someone out of place back in their place. She hadn't noticed the shift yet, the way passengers were whispering, the strange stillness of the crew, or the eyes slowly starting to turn in her direction. She hadn't felt it yet, but it was coming. Meanwhile, Ethan sat still. He didn't check his phone again. He didn't fidget or look around. He knew how this worked. His father wasn't loud. He didn't curse or slam his fist. He moved like a tide, slow, unstoppable, and devastating in his mind. Ethan imagined the call. His father's voice, low, commanding, cold as glass. Not shouting, just exact. He pictured the ripple traveling down the airline chain. From executive command to flight operations to the cockpit. And then finally to her. Karen Mitchell. She had no idea what was coming. The plane hadn't moved, but the flight had already shifted course in the cockpit. Captain Hammond cleared his throat. The line had gone silent. The command had been clear. He turned to the intercom, hesitated, then set it down. He couldn't say anything yet. Not officially. Not until she came. And she would come. The door to the cockpit opened a few minutes later. Karen Mitchell stepped inside, still composed, still unaware. Close the door, the captain said. She obeyed. When the door clicked shut, the atmosphere changed. A small screen on the side panel lit up. A man's face appeared, stern, unfamiliar to her. But the name underneath made her breath catch in her throat. David Harper, Director of Flight Operations. Karen Mitchell, the man said. We've received a call regarding a passenger in seat 2A. Her spine straightened. Her throat went dry. There was a seating issue, she began, her voice shaky but firm. I corrected it. Did you check the manifest? Harper interrupted. I didn't have time. The boarding process. You didn't follow protocol. You didn't confirm the passenger's identity. And worse, you didn't recognize who that passenger was. Karen's voice cracked. He was just a teenager. No, the captain said coldly. He is Ethan Cole Walker, son of James Carter. The name hit her like a punch. And he's sitting in economy because of you. There was a silence. Thick. Final. The captain continued. The flight is delayed on executive order. It will not move until this is resolved. Karen's hands trembled. What do you mean? You'll apologize. In front of everyone. And you'll walk him back to first class. Then you'll return here and await further instruction. She couldn't speak. You humiliated the wrong person, Harper said. Now you're going to make it right, or you won't fly again. She turned, slowly, her breath shallow, her heart pounding like a drumbeat of regret. The call had been made. The consequences were arriving. Karen Mitchell hummed softly as she stirred the cream into her coffee, unaware of the slow, looming shift that had just taken place in the world around her. She leaned against the galley counter, sipping with a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had handled that boy, put him back where he belonged. Sometimes order had to be maintained, even if people didn't like it. She didn't know. Not yet. The first hint came in the form of silence. Not the gentle hush of a cabin settling in before takeoff, but a tense, expectant quiet. Passengers were whispering. Eyes were darting, not toward the windows or phones, but toward her. And when the flight attendant at the front of the plane made eye contact with Karen, there was something unusual there. A nervous hesitation. Then came the knock. The cockpit door opened slightly, and the co-pilot's voice carried down the aisle like a summons from a judge. "Karen Mitchell, please step forward. The captain needs a word." The galley suddenly felt too small. She put her coffee down, carefully, straightened her blazer, then walked the length of the aisle, unaware that every footstep was being watched as she entered the cockpit. The door closed behind her with a dull thud that sounded much louder than it should have. Captain Hammond didn't speak. He simply pointed to the small communication screen, where a live video was already waiting. The face that appeared on the screen was cold, sharp, and it did not smile. "Karen Mitchell," said the man in a crisp tone. "I'm David Harper, Executive Director of Flight Operations." Karen's mouth opened slightly, her professional training kicking in despite the chill crawling up her spine. "Why, yes, sir. I'm calling in response to a report concerning your treatment of a passenger. Seat 2A. She swallowed. "There was some confusion," she offered quickly. "A young man, unaccompanied, in first class. I believed he may have been—" "Did you verify his ticket?" Harper interrupted. Her voice cracked. "I didn't have time to scan it, but I asked him and—" "You didn't follow standard boarding procedure. You acted on an assumption. A wrong one. And worse, you laid your hand on a passenger." Karen felt her blood drain. Her hands trembled slightly, though she fought to keep them at her sides. Harper continued, his voice like ice slicing through glass. "You removed Ethan Cole Walker from his seat without reason or authority. You placed him in coach. Do you know who he is?" She didn't answer. "His father," Harper said slowly, "is James Carter, the largest single shareholder of this airline. A man who just halted your flight." It was as if the temperature dropped 20 degrees. Karen felt her knees weaken. I didn't know." "You didn't care to know," Harper cut in. "That's the problem." Her breath hitched. "I've spoken with the captain. Here's what's going to happen." Karen braced herself. "You will walk back into that cabin. You will apologize publicly to Mr. Walker, and you will return him to his rightful seat in first class." The silence that followed was louder than any reprimand. Karen felt like the entire cockpit was pressing down on her. Her ears burned. Her chest tightened. "I expect professionalism, integrity, and humility," Harper said. "If you are not capable of delivering all three in the next 5 minutes, you will not fly for this airline again." Her mouth felt dry. "I understand," she whispered. "Do you?" Harper asked, one eyebrow raised. "Because this isn't about a teenager. This is about every single passenger on that plane. Watching how we treat people. Watching whether we own our mistakes." She nodded, unable to speak. The screen went dark. Captain Hammond didn't say a word, just gave a subtle nod. Karen turned. She walked out of the cockpit. Her heels clicking against the floor now felt like hammers as she stepped back into the cabin. Every eye was on her. The whispers stopped. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Ethan sat in economy. His posture was relaxed, his gaze steady. Karen approached him slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice quiet but audible. "I want to sincerely apologize for my behavior earlier. I failed to verify your ticket. I acted without proper judgment. And I deeply regret the way I treated you." She paused. "You were right to be in first class, and I was wrong." Ethan didn't smile. He He didn't gloat. He simply nodded once and stood. Karen took a small breath and motioned for him to follow. They walked back down the aisle, this time with every head turning, every eye tracking their movement. Karen opened the curtain to first class and held it open. Ethan stepped through. He returned to seat 2A. Karen stood for a second longer, then quietly stepped away, returning to the galley. Her face was pale. Her coffee had gone cold. Her pride, for the first time in years, had taken a back seat. The flight hadn't taken off yet, but the lesson had already landed. Karen stood at the front of the economy cabin, staring down the aisle as if it were a tightrope suspended above a pit. Her hands trembled, though she pressed them together to hide it. The captain's voice, still echoing in her ears, had left no room for ambiguity. The humiliation wasn't just personal. It was public, and that was exactly how it needed to be. She swallowed hard. Passengers glanced at her, some whispering, others simply watching, wide-eyed. They didn't know everything, but they knew something had shifted, that the stewardess who had once strutted confidently now carried the burden of something gone wrong. Karen began walking slowly. Each step felt longer than the one before it. Her black heels tapped against the floor with a dull, hollow sound. Her polished uniform now clung too tightly, like it didn't belong to her anymore. The smiles she used to wear so easily were gone. In their place, silence, heaviness, shame. Ethan sat where she had left him, in seat 22A, tucked between a man reading a magazine and a mother soothing her toddler. He was looking straight ahead, calm, composed, like none of this had affected him. But that silence of his, it was deafening. The kind of quiet that pierced harder than shouting ever could. Karen approached slowly, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "Mr. Walker," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I owe you an apology, a sincere one." Ethan didn't look at her at first. His eyes remained forward, fixed on nothing in particular. But the entire cabin was watching. Every ear was tuned in. People were no longer pretending to read or scroll. Even the toddler had quieted. Karen took a breath. "When you boarded this flight, I judged you unfairly. I assumed, based on how you looked, that you didn't belong in first class. I acted on that assumption. I didn't verify your ticket. I didn't treat you with respect. I was wrong." A pause. A long one. "I mishandled the situation. I humiliated you. And for that, I am deeply sorry." Now Ethan turned his head slowly. He looked her in the eyes. There was no anger, no resentment, just quiet strength. A presence that suddenly felt far bigger than the 17-year-old boy sitting there. He didn't speak, that he didn't need to. He stood up, gracefully, with a calmness that seemed almost regal. He adjusted his jacket, gave a polite nod to the mother and the man beside him, then turned to the aisle. Karen stepped aside as he walked past her. No arrogance, no revenge, just a quiet reclaiming of dignity. As Ethan made his way to the front of the plane, a ripple of realization swept through the passengers. Faces turned, eyebrows raised, whispers rose to murmurs. "That's him? James Carter's son? I heard the flight was grounded because of this." A man in business class leaned over the partition to get a better look. A woman clutched her purse tighter, suddenly aware that they were all part of something much bigger than they'd thought. Ethan reached first class. He didn't hesitate. He sat down. Seat 2, where he had belonged all along. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. Back in the economy cabin, Karen remained standing. For a moment, she considered retreating to the galley, to hide, to cry, to disappear. But the weight of her actions held her there. She felt the stares. Not all of them were cruel, but none were comforting. The silent judgment, the subtle disappointment, the knowing glances. It all sat heavy on her shoulders. She turned and began walking back up the aisle. Passengers didn't move, but their eyes followed her like shadows. She passed a middle-aged woman who gave her a pointed look, and a teenage boy who leaned to his mother and whispered, "She messed with the wrong kid." Karen reached the galley and finally exhaled. Leaning against the counter, her breath shaky, her pulse hammering. The walls around her suddenly felt thin, like anyone could see through them, into the cracks forming in the image she had built for herself over the years. Then, a quiet ping. Her work tablet vibrated. A notification. Notice of disciplinary review. Immediate action required. She closed her eyes. It had begun. The consequences weren't just about today. They were about every day before this one, every time she chose assumption over attention, pride over humility. And now, she'd been forced to learn, in front of the world, that silence could speak louder than outrage, that dignity needed no defense, and that sometimes the most powerful statement came from the one who said nothing at all. The boy had said nothing, and yet he had spoken volumes. Point 6. The consequences for Karen Mitchell. The cabin door slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. Point 2. Uniformed officials, representatives of the airline's internal affairs division, stood just outside the aircraft, waiting, serious expressions etched into their faces. Their presence didn't go unnoticed. Passengers shifted in their seats. Some craned their necks. Others whispered into the ears of their seatmates. Karen Mitchell stood frozen at the edge of the galley, her name still echoing in her mind after it had been called over the intercom. She knew what was coming. The captain hadn't looked at her once since she returned from apologizing. The rest of the crew gave her a wide berth. And now, as those two men approached, she felt the weight of every step they took. Miss Karen Mitchell, the taller of the two said, holding a badge at chest height. You're being removed from duty pending investigation. Please collect your personal items and come with us. For a split second, she thought to protest, to defend, to explain. But then she saw them, passengers watching. The mother from 22B, the man in business class who had whispered, the elderly couple with kind eyes but stern frowns, and Ethan Cole, still seated in 2A, silent, calm, regal. Karen didn't speak. She nodded slightly, turned around, and retrieved her small leather bag from the storage closet behind her. She smoothed the front of her uniform, a reflex she had repeated hundreds of times over the years. But this time it felt pointless. Symbolic, maybe, but meaningless. As she walked past the rows of passengers, the silence was suffocating. No applause, no insults. Just quiet recognition that something had shifted, that justice, or at least accountability, had found its way on board. And Ethan, he watched. Not with anger, not even with satisfaction, with purpose. As the cabin door closed behind Karen and the flight attendants resumed their duties, a stillness settled over the plane. A heavy quiet, like the moment after a storm. Everyone knew they had just witnessed more than a mistake. They had seen a system reveal its cracks, a bias surface without warning, and a response that did not match rage, but outclassed it with dignity. At a few rows behind Ethan, a teenager, probably the same age, leaned to his father and asked, "Do you think she'll get fired?" His father paused. "I think that's not the real question," he replied. "The real question is what the airline will do next." Because Ethan didn't just sit back in his seat and relax. He reached for his phone. He didn't open social media. He didn't post a video. He opened a private encrypted messaging app, one only a few executives and close associates had access to. And in it, he sent a short voice note. "Dad, I'm okay. Don't make this just about me. Make it about the policy, the training, the hiring process. This isn't just one person. This is a symptom." Seconds later, a reply came back. "Already drafting a statement. Let's meet after you land." And that was it. No drama, no spectacle, just strategy. Because Ethan Cole, despite his youth, understood something vital. This moment was not about revenge. It was about reform. By the time the plane touched down, news had already spread. Articles popped up online. Airline suspends flight attendant after mistreatment of billionaire son. Ethan Cole remains silent and sparks a bigger conversation. Privilege, bias, and dignity. What the incident revealed about modern air travel. Comment sections exploded. Some praised the airline for taking swift action. Others questioned how many similar incidents happened to people without Ethan's last name. A few applauded the boy for staying calm, dignified, and silent, letting the facts speak for themselves. But the most powerful words came later that evening. from Ethan in a carefully written statement posted on the Carter Foundation's website and his personal platform. He wrote, "This isn't about me. I have every resource at my disposal. What happened on that flight happens to people every day. People without last names that open doors. People who are judged before they're heard. This isn't about a seat on a plane. It's about the systems we build, the assumptions we accept, the silence we allow. Let this not be a moment, but a movement." His words were raw, unfiltered, and unflinchingly honest. And they resonated. Karen Mitchell, meanwhile, sat alone in a conference room at corporate headquarters the next day, awaiting her hearing. Her career now hung in the balance. But what weighed heavier than the potential dismissal was the realization that she had become a symbol. Not of villainy necessarily, but of complacency, of unchecked prejudice, of all the little moments where someone chose assumption over empathy. She had never thought it would be her. But that's the thing with blind spots, you rarely see them until they're exposed by light. And Ethan Cole, he had become that light. The cabin had long since emptied. The footsteps of passengers faded into the airport terminals, their chatter replaced by announcements echoing through the arrival hall. Yet, for many who had been on that flight, the journey had not ended when the wheels touched down. Something deeper had landed inside them. They had watched a 17-year-old boy experience injustice, quietly, with grace, without spectacle. They had watched a flight attendant, backed by years of habit and unchallenged assumptions, strip someone of dignity because of how he looked. And they had watched as power responded, not with vengeance, but with a call for reflection, accountability, and change. Ethan Cole never needed to raise his voice. He never made a scene, but somehow he made everyone listen. That is the real power of the story. It isn't about a billionaire's son being mistreated. It's not even about a flight attendant being reprimanded or a company launching a review. It's about what happened inside every person who witnessed the event. On board or online. One passenger later wrote in a blog post, "I didn't say anything. I thought, maybe he is in the wrong seat. But deep down, I knew what I was seeing. And I said nothing. That silence stays with me." That's what Ethan's silence did. It echoed louder than shouting ever could. It forced people to sit with themselves, to think, to question. Because dignity doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the stillness. Sometimes it shows up in the way someone straightens their back, takes a breath, and chooses not to fight. But to endure. Ethan's story teaches us something profound. That when faced with injustice, the most powerful act can be refusing to be reduced by it. He didn't try to prove himself. He didn't need to tell anyone who he was. He let others reveal who they were instead. And perhaps that's why the story resonates so deeply. We live in a world that often values volume over virtue, where being loud is mistaken for being right, where first impressions determine how someone is treated, and where those without privilege often suffer in silence. But Ethan flipped the script. He showed that you don't need to fight fire with fire. That respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you carry within, regardless of whether others offer it. And that, sometimes, silence isn't weakness, it's strength, it's restraint, it's clarity in chaos. As the video of his journey went viral, comments poured in from around the world. Parents told their children about Ethan. Teachers used the story in classrooms to talk about empathy. Airline workers discussed new training standards. Executives reflected on the subtle biases that go unchecked in the systems they lead. Because Ethan didn't just point out a problem, he became a mirror for others to see their own. And if you're reading this now, maybe you're asking yourself a question too. What would I have done on that plane? Would I have spoken up? Or stayed silent? It's okay if the answer makes you uncomfortable. Growth starts there. The important thing is what you do next. Let Ethan's story inspire you to choose differently moving forward, to pause before judging, to ask before assuming, to speak when silence becomes complicity, to be the person who sees not just the clothes, not just the class, not just the seat number, but the human being in front of you. And most of all, remember this: we all have a role to play in creating a more just world. A kinder world. A world where no one's worth is decided by their outfit, their status, or the stereotypes we silently carry. Ethan reminded us of that, not through anger, but through dignity. Not through shaming, but through stillness. So, if this story moved you, if it opened your eyes or stirred something in your heart, then let it live beyond this moment. Share it, talk about it, reflect on it. And if you want to hear more stories that uplift, challenge, and inspire, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. There's so much more to discover together. So many truths waiting to be told. Let's be the generation that listens, that learns, that leads with heart. Because change doesn't always come with a bang. Sometimes it begins with a quiet seat in the back of the plane, and a boy who chooses silence not out of fear, but out of strength.